Queen undoubtedly are a pretty mixed bag. Some have suggested they sail perilously close to progressive rock. Welcome classic rock fans to a video where we talk about Queen and their progressive tendencies. Sounds quite rude, doesn't it? I mean, let's face it, Queen are a band that, as I said in the intro, are a pretty mixed bag. And they've toyed with numerous genres. This is probably symptomatic of having numerous writers in the band as well. They've fluctuated from all-out hard rock with poppy bits to high camp struttings and leotards with Freddie's vocal prowess. Something to marvel at in itself. From the flamenco of innuendo provided by the fingers of Steve Howe to the heavy James Brown of Another One Bites the Dust. And maybe we should even mention the hot, sweaty funk of Hot Space. Or maybe we shouldn't mention that. But also, vaudeville and musical pastiche. There's something for everyone when you listen to Queen. But as well as being a damn good rock band, they also veered dangerously close to progressive rock territory. With songs about fairy queens and ogres and prophets with operatic interludes. All stuff that keeps the beard strokers and pipe smokers happy. Progressive rock, of course, is a genre that's very much defined or characterised by complex, elaborate concepts, varied time signatures, all emanating from the ashes of psychedelia in the late 60s and avant-garde pop. But many argue that Queen fall more into the Roxy camp than the progressive rock camp, more art rock than progressive rock. A kind of a snobby version of the Sweet, if you will. And that's a fair point, I think. But let's consider all that early 1970s genre-twisting, complex harmonising concepts and strolls along the promenade to the fantasy realm of Rye. A brilliant concept that would have made a most excellent progressive rock album in itself. And Queen too, where the band go all Greta Garbo on us. Remarkable piece of work with complex harmonies, rhythm changes, themes rife with prog elements. And their studio work at this time involved an insane amount of layering. Some have suggested that their studio, the actual original tapes, are almost transparent. They've just been worn so thin. Which ultimately, of course, leads them to, to Night at the Opera. With its eclectic blend of rock, folk, operatic stylings, ragtime Dixieland music hall, waltz and everything in between. It seems it all has been referenced on this album. Queen are one of those bands that are not necessarily progressive rock, but seem to be a band that seems to be most pleasing to those that consider themselves hardcore prog fans. So if we had to consider their progressive traits, and the most, certainly as demonstrated in the most progressive numbers, let's take a look at their more proggier moments, shall we? For me, the Prophet song from 1975's Night at the Opera, this is a wonderful arrangement, which is often overshadowed, of course, by Bohemian Rhapsody. The opening track on side 2, for those of you who remember vinyl, it's Queen's, this is Queen's progressive peak. I think this was a number written by Brian May, if I'm not mistaken. I think he wrote it after he had a dream about a flood. It certainly has an apocalyptic, almost biblical feel to it with the wind at the beginning of it. I mean, how close to the edge is this? This track goes all the way back to Queen 2, but was abandoned because it just didn't fit the tone of the album. March of the Black Queen. Interesting, Freddie Mercury said of this one that that song took me ages to complete. I wanted to give it everything, to be self-indulgent or whatever. The words from the man himself, and blimey, he could have been describing Tarkus, couldn't he? Certainly Queen 2 is described as the band's most overtly prog or progressive album. And March of the Black Queen is 6.5 minutes, a lengthy piece. Yeah, it's hardly Plague of Lifehouse Keepers, but this is a wonderful piece of prog pomp. Great King Rat from the debut album, came in 1973 if I'm not mistaken. Certainly signposted the band's more arty direction, I think. And it was definitely a foreshadowing of their second album. Lengthy, rocking out and packed with time changes, it typifies the early Queen sound. I think on that first Queen album they lean a little bit too heavily towards Led Zeppelin in my opinion. But there you go, that's just me. But nevertheless, it's a huge fan favourite to this day. My Fairy King, with lyrics inspired by Robert Browning's The Pied Piper of Hamelin, and it's packed with those wonderful vocal overdubs from Freddie. This is also on the debut album. It allows fans to marvel at Freddie hammering away at those piano keys. The Fairy Fella's Masterstroke, which is a compact number to say the least. Certainly not the longest number they've ever done. It's actually inspired by a painting by Richard Dadd of the same title, packed with fantasy themes and characters. Roger Taylor described it as Queen's biggest stereo experiment. But to the rest of us, it just sounds damn proggy. White Queen, as it began, is a beautiful blending of acoustic elements and hard rock. It's another pointer to where the band were heading, I suppose, and you could say it foreshadows tracks like the Prophet song, not to mention the overplayed Bohemian Rhapsody, of course. Again, written by Brian May, it takes another literary influence, this time from Robert Graves, The White Goddess, as well as being partly inspired by a young woman that Brian May had his eyes on at the time. Another Queen 2 classic, another Queen 2 proggy moment. Innuendo, of course, is one of their later numbers, and we don't often talk about later Queen within the context of their more art rock and progressive rock tendencies, but Innuendo is a marvellous composition. Apparently it's a slight nod and tribute to Led Zeppelin's Kashmir. But of course it features Steve Howe, the wonderful Steve Howe, who has actually stated that he felt it was unnecessary bringing him in because Brian May had done a pretty damn good job himself. This is Queen's longest single, even exceeding the length of Bohemian Rhapsody, and went straight to #1. We can't talk about Queen and progressive rock without mentioning Ogre Battle, another one from Queen 2, a song that dates back to 1971, probably thrashing out when they were Smile, perhaps. They wanted to wait till they had access to some pretty good studio technology in order to give this song wings and to do it justice. A beautiful piece of studio ingenuity, with the ending being the start just played backwards. I mean, how proggy is that? And this list would not be complete without mentioning Bohemian Rhapsody with its operatic stylings. I remember one of my earliest musical memories is as a child sitting down and watching that video play on, I think it was on Top of the Pops, and feeling incredibly spooked by it. It was very eerie for me at that age. I also remember seeing Rod Stewart, the video of Rod Stewart promoting his I Am Sailing. Bugger me, I'm old. But, you know, undoubtedly it's a song that we've all heard too many times, but you can't help but consider it an absolute triumph of arrangement and studio ingenuity. When I was a child and listening to this, I could swear blind that the band were calling out, "Spare him his life" from those pork sausages. So there you are, that's my exploration of Queen's more proggy elements. If you're new to this channel, please do click like, subscribe and check that notification bell, it's ever so important. Share this video by all means. Other than that, I'll leave you with my closing salvo, which is hope you're well, staying safe, and that you keep listening.